Well, before we wrap up, there's obviously a few more questions I want to touch on.
Yeah.
Mostly about Leverkusen, but also just a general Bundesliga point, which I think is important. Russell asks, where do Leverkusen go from here? And then Adam asks, why do so many Bundesliga teams view going to Bayern as something to survive and move past rather than an opportunity to bring their A game and test themselves against the best? Now, this is something we were kind of debating in our WhatsApp chat with the guys who help run this podcast and the newsletter with us. And it's an interesting question, Manu, because, I mean, we can kind of break it apart if we want. Leverkusen were shit because Leverkusen are shit this season, and they've obviously brought in a new head coach who's in Rasmus Yeoman, who's still trying to kind of get to terms with a squad that he didn't build and inherited a team from Erik ten Hag that was probably all over the place. Leverkusen are absolutely a team in transition, team full of potential for sure, but just not capable of going to the Allianz Arena and causing an upset by any means at this point. But
yeah,
well, let's do that first. Let's do Leverkusen first.
I was never more disappointed about a team's performance at the Allianz Arena than this one. I was worried about how Dortmund would play, and the first 30 minutes was very worrying, and then in the second half they really turned it on, and that was a really good game. I don't think anyone would have complained if Leverkusen had lost 2-1 at the Allianz Arena after a battle. Like top teams, the best.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, but like if Leverkusen had put in the same performance and lost.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
Yeah, and some of the best teams in the world go to the Allianz Arena and get smashed, right? That's just the reality of it. But I mean, the only reason this result wasn't higher is because Bayern Munich let Leverkusen live. This is just a fact. And Leverkusen went into this match, and I mean, they looked scared. They looked like a bunch of kids facing man, and they just looked absolutely scared. They looked like they were out of depth. They didn't have any composure whatsoever. It's actually, as this game I watched this game in the States, and it was on main television here, and it was hyped up and all that, and the Bundesliga did like a big DFL house in New York and all that sort of stuff. And then one of those two teams shows up like this. It's embarrassing. I thought it was an absolutely embarrassing performance. And if I was Simon Rolfes, I'd be going into the dressing room and give them the hairdryer treatment, because like it's okay to lose there. Again, that's fine. But the way this team got dismantled in 45 minutes by Bayern Munich's B team in front of a million people audience in the United States and other key markets puts the league into a bad light. And as a member, like you as Bayer Leverkusen are one of the 18 members of that league that's trying to sell this product abroad. And like, if you're not up to playing at this level, then this is maybe not the right job for you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think I said it full time. No, I said at halftime, we're at halftime in the Allianz Arena, and Bayern's B team are beating Liverpool's feeder club comfortably, and like obviously a few people had a lot of jokes about it, but I said, look, I love German football. We don't do this podcast to pay the bills. We do this podcast because we love German football. We love talking about it. It's just out of a sheer love for the football. I know we have subscriptions and people pay us and stuff, but that's to keep the thing going. But, we don't do this out of anything but our love for German football. And a game like that one, I was so dejected at halftime. And I know there'll be Bayern fans listening and watching and be like, oh, but that's because you hate Bayern Munich. And it's not because of that by any means. I definitely don't hate Bayern Munich. And I support Bayern Munich in the Bundesliga, in the Champions League, when they're playing teams from England or Spain or Italy or whatever. But I get so dejected when, as you said, teams, and as Adam has quite asked in that question, why teams just don't even try. They show up to the Bayern Munich and they think it's a bye. They can just, it's a dead rubber. They don't have to try. And it comes across as if there's no expectation or pressure on these teams to perform. It'd be one thing if it was Augsburg or St. Pauli. In fact, St. Pauli put up a much better fight, so did Augsburg actually this season already.
Yep.
But if one of these kind of minnows, with all due respect, really struggled at the Allianz Arena, you'd understand. But a club of Leverkusen's resources and a club of Leverkusen's kind of history and the people at the club, they should be doing better. And I I think there's two things at hand here. Number one is the economics of European football, which means clubs like Leverkusen just get completely pulled apart every summer. We've seen it with Leverkusen, we've seen it with Frankfurt, we've seen it with
Yeah.
Stuttgart this summer. I think a lot of German clubs will say, well, there's not much we can do. There's so much money in England and Saudi Arabia and at Real Madrid and Barcelona, and that's true. But I think a lot of them hide behind that excuse because I think a lot of them like making money. And I think clubs like Leverkusen, Frankfurt, and Stuttgart know, well, maybe not Stuttgart as much, but definitely Frankfurt, Leverkusen know we can make 150 million euros in the transfer market every year, and it's not going to seriously jeopardize our standing in the league. And their standing in the league is anywhere between second place and 10th place. Now, obviously, if Leverkusen finished 10th, it's not a great season, but it's not the end of the world for them. And I think that's a major issue, which is obviously and Leverkusen have essentially opted to sell their best players and just have an off season where they try and rebuild. And there's a lot of clubs that are doing that as well. Leipzig are doing that this season, Frankfurt doing this season, Stuttgart to an extent as well. Maybe not Stuttgart as much, but definitely Leverkusen. And I think those clubs are allowed to do that. And I don't just mean sell players, but also give themselves an off season to rebuild with the 10 young players they've signed from French and Belgium every year, because there's no culture of winning at these clubs. And I think this is a serious issue, because if I went to speak to people, and I didn't bother doing this because I know I'd probably just get shouted at, but if I went to speak to someone at Leverkusen after yesterday's game and said, what the hell's going on there? I'd just get told to F off, because they'd say, it's not our job to challenge Bayern Munich. It's not our job to go to the Allianz Arena and win. It's not our job to challenge the league title every year. But the problem is, the people at Leverkusen are saying that, and the people at Frankfurt are saying that, and the people at Dortmund say that as often as they possibly can. And even the people at Leipzig are saying that as well. And the problem is, if nobody's willing to step up and say it's our job to challenge Bayern, nobody challenges Bayern. And it seeps into the culture of these clubs. And yeah, you can have a head coach who can step in from time to time and say, no, I want to win something, like a Klopp, like a Nagelsmann. Maybe a Sebastian Hoeneß or a Kovac might step in. So maybe even Timo Werner might say, I'm not just here to develop the kids, I want to win something. So special things can happen. But I just think if one of us was to sit here with Simon Rolfes or Castro or, Sebastian Kehl or whoever else and say, why does this keep happening? They would say, well, it's not our job to challenge Bayern. So,
Yeah.
And that's that.
And I mean, the flip side of that is I often ask the people at Bayern Munich, like, isn't it a problem that your league isn't competitive? And they will say, like, well, that's not our problem. We're not going to stop winning games. Like, our job is to win every single game. Like, our ambition is to be the best team in the world. Like, it says it in their anthem.
Yeah.
Like, it's up to Dortmund and Frankfurt and, like, Leverkusen and Stuttgart. Like, we want them to challenge us. Like, in fact, we would welcome it. But we can't just give them money and tell them to challenge us. Like that, this is not how this works. Like so you have one club that is ultra competitive, and you have a bunch of teams that are not, and that's a culture. I said this in the chat. I actually think that's a cultural problem.
Yeah, of course it is. Another thing as well, Manu, is it's a very lucrative gig to be the second or third biggest team in Germany.
Yeah,
Dortmund make a fortune every year. Frankfurt make a fortune every year. These clubs are in the, Forbes top 20 most valuable clubs in the world and the biggest revenues.
And they make profits too. Like unlike the Premier League teams, like the profit margins are enormous. Like
so if you're a shareholder at Dortmund or at Frankfurt or anything, things couldn't be better. You don't need to win the league. You don't need to win the Bundesliga to get your dividends every year or to to make profits and stick it in the bank every year. And I think that's an issue too, in the sense that I just keep coming back to this idea that these clubs are too comfortable. Frankfurt can have an off-season. Leverkusen can have an off-season. Now, I know people will be saying, well, Leverkusen sacked their head coach. They didn't sack Ten Hag because he'd lost 2 or 3 games. They sacked him because they realised very on this wasn't going to work. Behind closed doors, personality-wise, issue with players and squads and the recruitment. That's why Ten Hag was sacked. He wasn't sacked because they might finish 5th or 6th this year, because they probably will finish 5th or 6th and it won't really make a difference. And I do think that's the issue. At Bayern Munich, 6 failures just not accepted. At Frankfurt, at Leverkusen, at Leipzig, and maybe to a slightly less extent at Dortmund, because I know Dortmund have to finish the top 4 every year. But for the most part, these clubs are comfortable where they are. They're far too comfortable from a financial point of view to actually need to succeed, to actually need to. If Frankfurt or Dortmund could only register a profit every year by winning the Bundesliga and say getting into the Champions League, these clubs would be going hell for leather to challenge Bayern. And, you know, Leverkusen would be walking onto the pitch at the Allianz Arena to fight tooth and nail for every inch, every blade of grass. But it's just not there. And, you know, I guess I'm just in full rant mode and we probably do have to wrap this podcast up. But I don't know. It was a very frustrating game and it kind of brought out all these things that I love German football, but it's definitely a thing that pisses me off about it.
I do unfortunately think it's a cultural thing. Like when you're in Munich and you see how ambitious that city is. You saw it with like the Olympic application, right? Like, you know, they're like, we want to host the Olympics and therefore we're going to ask the people whether they're going to want it. And they got it done within weeks, right? And whereas like the other places in Germany that want to apply, they're still trying to get the act together. And Berlin, for example, doesn't even know what they're doing yet. And so I think it's just a cultural thing. Like things just get done faster, better, and bigger in Bavaria than in the rest of the country. And so like I do actually unfortunately think, and I know the rest of Germany always kind of like is mad about it or like, you know, is upset about it, but or like looks down on Bavaria or is jealous of Bavaria because things are usually better there. But that's because there's more ambition there. And like sometimes it fails spectacularly and sometimes it sounds hilarious, but like there's a reason Bayern Munich play in Bavaria and are successful, right? I think it's actually fundamentally a cultural thing. And that's not going to change. For that to change, you need to have like teams that have, like Frankfurt are the only team in the state of Hesse. Stuttgart, like, you know, Baden-Württemberg is almost as rich as Bavaria. Like Stuttgart has the ability to emulate or copy what Bayern Munich have done in Bavaria. You know, like Hamburg should not be a team that's just come back from the second division after 7 years. Like considering the money that's available there. So like it is a cultural problem, unfortunately. And that's not going to change until, you know, like maybe the incentives need to be different.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right, and maybe these clubs should be as comfortable financially, but
yeah.
Anyway, we're not going to solve that today. But I think I think that sums up our frustration with that game, didn't it?
I do think the Leverkusen performance was shocking, and I said it before the season that, you know, I named them as my biggest flop of the year, and I thought, oh, maybe I'm wrong with Hjulmand now being appointed, and I do think Hjulmand is the right coach, but I think my flop of the year prediction is going to be spot on.
Yeah, I mean, even like, not to kind of take it back up because we do need to wrap up, but Leverkusen is a good example of, yes, they won the league title, and people will be saying, oh, well, why are you guys giving Leverkusen grief? They're the last team to challenge the league title. They challenged for the league title because they had an exceptional head coach in Xabi Alonso who made the club sign his players, and he was able to put together a squad of ready-made stars like Grimaldo, like Granit Xhaka, you know, and there's a bunch of other ones I can't even think about, to be honest, but every summer they signed, when he was there, they signed his players. Jonas Hoffmann's another one as well, actually, I think. And when he moved on, as we reported on this podcast, people at Leverkusen told me we can go back to the way we've done things before. That is signing young players, developing them, making lots of money, and doing the same thing again. And you have to kind of question at what point is any of this actually any use to fans of the club specifically or the league itself, because there's so many clubs that are they're just kind of like finishing schools for footballers as opposed to actual sporting organizations that want to win trophies and medals, you know? Anyway, maybe that's a good way to wrap it up, man.
Let's wrap this up.